Welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started in the interest of the rich evening we have ahead. I'm Liz Childs, a professor of art history in the Department of Art History and Archaeology here in Arts and Sciences, that we're being housed today in the Sam Fox School. I'd like to begin tonight by acknowledging that Washington University in St. Louis occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Osage Nation, Missouri, Illinois Confederacy, Quapaw, Ho-Chunk, Miami, and many other tribes who served and continue to serve as custodians of this land. We recognize their sovereignty was not ceded after unjust removal, and we encourage you to learn more about tribal removal, tribal sovereignty, and the history of this place we call St. Louis. We are grateful to the Catherine M. Booter Center for American Indian Studies in the Brown School of Social Work at WashU for making this information publicly available. And we encourage all of you to visit the Booter Center website, B-U-D-E-R, I am going to spell it, for more information, and to consider also attending the 35th annual Booter Center Powwow coming up on April 12th, to which you're all invited. Moreover, and sooner than that, WashU will co-sponsor with valued community partners a full day-long program on March 28th on recultivating Indigenous sovereignty and stewardship. Free registration is available on WashU's Center for the Environment website. We encourage you to look that over. So, it's my pleasure tonight to welcome you to Indigenous Perspectives 2, Museums, Stewardship, and Native American Art. First, we hope you enjoyed the brief tours highlighting the Native artists on display in two of the current exhibitions here at the Kemper, and many thanks to Kemper curators Meredith Malone and Dana Ostrander, who shared their expertise with you in the galleries just now. And if you missed their mini tours, please come back on your own. Tonight's initiative follows on work initiated under a Divided City grant, funded 2 years ago by the Mellon Foundation and the WashU Humanities Center, to create what has become the Indigenous St. Louis Working Group, a community network with an interest in promoting an understanding of and a respect for Native histories, knowledge, and culture in our region. Ongoing thanks to Gavin Krober here tonight for his leadership and for Charlie Bosco, who kept us moving in that first pivotal year. Last year, we held our first panel on this general theme of Indigenous perspectives here in this very welcoming space. This year's panel is co-sponsored by Art History and Archaeology and the American Culture Studies program, both in Arts and Sciences, and other support generously offered by the Kemper Museum. Special thanks for the vision and commitment of Professor Paige McGinley, Director of AMCS. Further thanks to our program committee, which last fall envisioned this evening. Curators Dana Ostrander, Meredith Malone from the Kemper, and the dynamic Meredith Lehman, former head of education here, as well as the support of Sabine Ekman. The daunting task of coordinating tonight's program was undertaken with goodwill and energy by Allison Eigelzade of AMCS and Brooke Eastman, doctoral student in art history. I just have to give them an applause. And without the collaboration of this entire group, we wouldn't be able to gather tonight. We begin our program with an opening blessing offered by Galen Gritz. Galen is a registered member of the Cherokee Nation and holds a degree in history from the University of Missouri, St. Louis. Among his many civic roles, he represents the local Native American community at the Barnes Jewish Hospital Disparities Elimination Advisory Committee and is a board member of the Missouri chapter of the National Trail of Tears Association. Galen,
I'm going to give a blessing. Creator, we give thanks for the world and life in which you have placed us. Help us to realize that they are both verbs. They are ever changing. We are ever changing. Help us to realize we need transactions to survive. But life and people are not transactional. Help us to know there is no art of the deal, but there is art to love and to life. Thank you for the knowledge brought together tonight in this space, and the panelists, and the conveners, and the audience. Thank you for allowing us to gather our days together this evening. May we all become wiser for being here.
Thank you, Galen. Now I'll offer very brief introductions to our 3 guest speakers, giving these all at one time to keep the program moving so we can benefit from a Q&A session from all of you at the end. Our keynote speaker tonight, we're pleased to say, is Dr. Heather Ahtone, a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation and currently Director of Curatorial Affairs at the First Americans Museum in Oklahoma City. And as she said earlier today, if you've not been there, shame on you. It's time to go. She pursued her graduate degrees at the University of Oklahoma, and she's worked in the Native arts community since 1993. Her research explores the intersection between Indigenous cultural knowledge and contemporary arts. And one current project that's so strong is to create what she terms reunions for objects from the National Museum of the American Indian collection with families within the tribal nations of Oklahoma. She will publish a book and feature-length film on this innovative work in 2025, and we look forward to it. Her topic tonight will be Indigenous philosophy as curatorial methodology. Our second speaker is Dr. Meranda Roberts, a citizen of the Yarrington Paiute tribe and a Chicana. She's currently a visiting assistant professor at Pomona and a Native scholar in residence at Pitzer College, both in the Claremont colleges. She pursued her graduate degrees at the University of California, Riverside. And among her many curatorial projects is the 2023 exhibition at Idlewild, Still We Smile, Humor as Correction and Joy, featuring Native artists who embrace wit, irony, and satire to communicate their cultural worldviews. I also recommend her website, Meranda Writes History, all one word, .com/curatorial killjoy, where she writes, "My duty as a curator is to think of the next generation of Native museum workers and collaborators and to pave the way for a more seamless and inclusive working environment. My curation tells a story." Her talk tonight derives from her work at the Field Museum in Chicago in 2018 and will be called Reclaiming Our Stories, Renovating the Field Museum's Native Exhibition Hall. And our third speaker, very happy to say, is Dakota Hoska from the Oglala Lakota Nation, Pine Ridge Wounded Knee, who until very recently served as the Associate Curator of Native Arts and the NAGPRA Coordinator at the Denver Art Museum. She pursued her graduate work in Native American arts at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. And we're very honored she would join us this month in a time of great personal transition, for in a few weeks, she assumes her position as the inaugural curator of Native American art at the National Gallery in Washington. And we wish her all success and all strength in this important new role. Her topic tonight is Curating Sustained, the Persistent Genius of Indigenous Art. Please join me in welcoming these distinguished speakers.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. My grandfather taught that whoever was in the room, that's who's supposed to be here. So thank you all for making the time tonight. And I'm just going to tell you, this is a very difficult presentation to give. There's a lot of personal emotion that was invested. It was a very complicated process for us to do. And to your benefit or not, I only get 30 minutes. So I've started my timer, and we're going to race through there because there's not so much time to spend on each slide. But I want to thank you to our host, Elizabeth and Brooke have been fantastic with their hospitality. I'm thankful for the Kemper giving us the space to speak today. And Galen, who we've met before, and I appreciate your prayer. I heard your words, and I'm going to try to do right by them and try not to cause any lightning for saying anything I shouldn't have said. So how many of you have been to the First Americans Museum? I'll be honest, that's more than I expected. So thank you for coming, those of you who've come. For those of you who have not, we are just down the road, literally on the 44. There's no reason for you not to come, and there's lots of reasons for you to come, and we're going to talk about some of that right now. This is our museum. This is the exterior looking due east, actually looking due west. That large structure that you see that looks like a giant, I don't know, it's been called a lot of different things, but it is actually a 21st century interpretation of a Wichita grass hut. And that is because the Wichita and the Caddo people are the original inhabitants of the landscape that we now inhabit. And I just always want to just make sure people understand that. But there's a history to this space, and this is our location in direct relationship to the downtown Oklahoma City skyline. We are an institution that has been built with the vision of our ancestors' genius. I like that word. They are brilliant, and the millennia of developing our knowledge, our philosophies, informs the work that we do there. What you're seeing here is our 21st century mound, and I'll go back so you can kind of see it in this one without the sun glaring in your eyes. The entire site is built as a cosmological clock. The mound has 2 access points at the far apex of the mound there, and just you see it kind of sticking out here is a tunnel, and the sun sets in that tunnel during the winter solstice and sets on the top of the apex of the mound during the summer solstice. And we acknowledge those. We open our space to invite the community in. The first year we did this, we had 200 people, and we felt pretty good about it. Last year we had 1,500. The community in Oklahoma is a very diverse cosmological space. There are 39 tribes recognized there. 38 of them are federally recognized. The Yuchi tribe, which is currently citizens of the Muskogee Creek Nation, having come during the removal period under their care and protection, have remained citizens of the Muskogee Creek Nation, but have made an application to be recognized independently. And so they are part of that Muskogee Creek movement. Our tribes come from the Atlantic to the Pacific and from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. And if you can imagine that, every one of these tribes has their own language, their own Genesis story, their own site for the Garden of Eden. They have their own ways of understanding the world, and that perspective informs the current cultural fabric of this landscape that is now known as Oklahoma. These are the names of those tribes, and we actually have a publication that we published this past summer or last year to inform you. You can buy that on our website if you're interested. And one of the things that our commitment to with the museum is to let people know who are these tribes, because even as citizens of the state, many people can barely name 5 of them, and that is unacceptable. These are sovereign nations. These are people who have their removals into Indian territory laid a foundation upon which every citizen in the United States is a beneficiary, because we are all on treaty land. Whether you recognize that the land that this is on was a treaty land or not, it's a fact. These are the good people with whom I had the privilege to work to build our galleries. I was hired in March of 2018. I formerly was the curator of Native American and non-Western art. Had the good privilege of knowing Nicole Bridges. Thank you so much for the good reminder today and reconnecting. And I was at the University of Oklahoma as the curator of Native American non-Western art. And I was hired to FAM in March of 2018 for the museum to open in 2021. We were given 38 months to develop, conceptualize, research, write, design, fabricate, and install 26,000 square feet of gallery space. If I had understood what that math meant, I might not have taken the job, but there we are. I've always been a little ambitious. That's definitely been said of me. And what you're looking at is our curatorial team, both the team members who were on the curatorial team with me, 11 of us that did the work to build the galleries, and 8 advisors, each in their own right, a national leader, but also tribal citizens. And so our team would take steps of development phases, report back to them quarterly. It created for us a check and balance. We couldn't get stuck any place. We had to make sure we were keeping the gas pedal down. And but it also gave us a chance to hear from our elders about whether the work we were doing was satisfying the needs of what our institution needed to provide to our community. And there were times when they were very pleased with us. There were also times that they said, no, no, this is not enough. You are not pushing the stories. We get one chance to tell these stories. If we do not do that, if we do not share the grief and the horrors, the joys, the resilience of our ancestors, we have missed our moment. And so there were several areas that we literally, our curatorial team, which are all tribal citizens, had to endure hours upon hours, weeks upon weeks, and months upon months of reliving the trauma of our histories, reliving the trauma of our ancestors, reliving the trauma of our families, to be able to hit that mark. These are their names, some of whom have gone on to really great jobs, and I'm so glad that they got jobs afterwards. Our work was based on contracts. We were opening with the expectation that there would be me and a collections manager, and everybody else was working on contract. They came, they brought the best of themselves. None of them previously had curated. And there are not a deep, you have 3 of us. If there's no way we're allowed in the same car or the same plane at the same time, because there are too few of us. But thankfully, people like Meranda are coming up, that there are young people coming up. I feel like our future is quite bright in the Indigenous curatorial field. But you should know that in 2012, I was hired to the University of Oklahoma as one of 3 Native Americans working in the continent, curating Native American art in a non-federal institution. And so this has been something that has been an exponential growth, necessarily so, but we are not done growing that field. And so many of these people, including 2 of whom, John Hamilton and Marianne Parker, who are now both curators working with me, and we are developing a process by which we can then train other curators through our work at FAM. And this is who we are today. So from the left in the back is Michelle Shoto, who is our collections manager, John Hamilton, who holds all the testosterone that we need for the team, Anna Smith, who is a Sac and Fox, brilliant young mind, challenges me every day as I think it's the Gen Z generation. Like, it's definitely a different way of thinking, but God bless her. I'm so grateful that she spends her time with us. And then Marianne Gouladel Parker, who's in the green sweater, who actually started working for us on the team before she'd even graduated with her undergraduate degree. And in that time, we've been able to support her to complete a master's degree in cultural administration. And then you recognize me. And in the back is one of the galleries that we've been working in. I came to FAM with 12 years of experience working as an Indigenous curator. I had done 6 years of working as an independent curator simply because what I saw from having lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is it's a place of lots of art, right? What I saw was that there were not any Native curators, and what I also saw was there was a lot of my community members from Oklahoma who came and made their income entirely in Santa Fe, and they were not known at home. And that to me was an atrocity. And I decided that I wanted to go home and do something about that. And God bless, I'd seen enough curators to know it's not that hard of a job. So I said, I'm going to go home, and I had met this beautiful Navajo man who I said, you can come with me or not, but God bless him, he's followed me, he's been with me for the last 32 years, and I'm grateful for him every day. In the course of all that, what I had seen was that there was a curatorial practice established out of a tradition of understanding art through a European lens. I might be white appearing to you, but I was raised by my grandparents, and my first languages were not English. And I have had to figure out how to maneuver in a space. Museums are not spaces for Native people. They have been violent spaces for us, as we have had to go into museums and see the things of our ancestors displayed with somebody else's voice talking about it, with no representation of our cultural perspectives included in that, unless somebody just wants to talk about maybe the fact that clay is important to Pueblo people. And I'm not dismissing the importance of what a curator does at all. But what I am saying is that the knowledge of our tribal communities is a deep, deep well of which only 15% is maybe represented in scholarship. And I will tell you that's not necessarily all the scholarship that's out there. So there's a lot of scholarship out there that is completely unreliable and unusable. And so I wanted to figure out, how could I do this? I love contemporary art. I have been browsing these galleries. This is my third time here to the Kemper. I love this place. You guys do a great job here. And that contemporary voice is such an incredibly powerful way of communicating information. We know this. You're in this room because you probably have some thought of affection for art or the community in some way. It moves you in some way. And our Indigenous art does the same thing. But there is knowledge and philosophy embedded in that art. And there was not a guide for me to figure out how to make that transition, how to create a bridge from our Indigenous world perspectives for audiences to understand what we were doing in that art. And so I developed this methodology, and nobody knew I was doing it, but I did. I really did. I really was like trying to push myself through this. I worked through a master's degree. I worked through a doctoral dissertation that met the requirements for anthropology, art history, and Native American studies. I was interested in anthropology to understand the cultural perspectives and how those are studied. I was interested in art history because of its focus very singularly on the art. And I was very interested in Indigenous methodologies that provided to me the framework of respect, reciprocity, relationships, and responsibility as a way of building the work and the perspective into how we do the work that I felt like that it mattered. And these are things that we have formulated. I have hired about 8 people through the department since the time we've opened, and at various times, and I lay this in front of them and I say, this is how we operate here. If you don't agree with this, you need to walk out right now, because you're not going to like working for me, because I'm going to hold you accountable for your work. I'm going to hold you accountable for your schedule. I'm going to hold you accountable for your budget. But we're also going to build some relationships where you can hold me accountable for caring about you. You can hold me accountable for caring about the work. And we can work together with the tribal communities to develop a mechanism by which we can be responsible to the knowledge they share, respectful in the process of doing it, and establishing reciprocity. Thank you for the term transaction, because reciprocity is a form of transactional, or it's a form of exchange, but it displaces that it's all transactional. And it says, I'm going to give my very best to you, and I expect you to give me your very best. And we're going to trust each other that we're doing the best we can. And whatever you give, I'm going to be grateful for that. And I'm going to be thoughtful about that. And so this informed the work that we did to build the galleries. What you're looking at right now is our Origins Theater, and this is in our Oklahoma gallery. We have 2 exhibitions. One is called Oklahoma. This speaks to the collective history of the tribal nations in Oklahoma. How did 67 tribal communities land in Oklahoma and become 39? And this is where we speak. What you're looking at is an animated story from 4 tribes. This is one of those, which is the Oto Missouri. When did we become human in this space. Our stories, like most epic creation stories, have a deep history before that moment and a deep history after that. But this speaks to the clan system of the ahtone, Missouri. It's done in the style of beadwork, which is specific to their community. And we invite people to come into this immersive space, and this is how you start your journey in the gallery. This is the place where we talk about and identify. Each of those circles is very specifically identifying the site for the Garden of Eden, if you will, for each of the 39 tribes. And they are across the continent, even more spread out than we were from that first map that we looked at, right? Because we come from all over the place. Some of our tribes today are the product of that 67 tribes coming in, and some of those communities had historic relationships and have formed a single political body. So you see that represented in those large circles where there's maybe 4 or 5 different tribal bands that became a single political body today. But you also see the tiny little circles, and some of those are like really specific places that one community knows. Did I name them? No. You know why? Because I know if I name them and I made a GPS location, some idiot's going to go out there and tromp all over our sacred lands, and that is not the intention of the work. But it is to embody the fact that our Native people, our Indigenous people, have been in this land for well over 30,000 years, and there are stories that can go even deeper than that. We come to this work knowing that most museum collections are built with ancestral items that have been stolen from the graves of our ancestors or that have been ripped out of spaces that they simply should not be. There are museums across this continent that have over 200,000 of our ancestors still held as human remains. This is part of that violence that museums have enacted. What we wanted to do is we wanted to think, how could we shift that? As an all-Native team, how could we make this space safe for our community to come and engage with, but also still speak to that deep history? And what's often not considered by people is that these items that you see that look very similar to ancestral items that you might have seen in books or otherwise, this technical knowledge still lives in our communities. So we simply use the acquisitions fund that we had to commission living contemporary Native artists to make things that look like ancestral items. They're still Native made, they are still speaking to our history, they're still providing that deep perspective on time, but they don't violate our sort of cultural ethos of being around objects. We were today at St. Louis Art Museum, and there were several items I was very taken with, but I also saw that it takes a toll on people to be in those spaces, and it's hard to explain that unless you just see somebody just literally be affected by those experiences. We did not want our Native community coming in and feeling attacked or assaulted by those practices. We also see the genius of the design that our ancestors have laid before us. And so this is actually a blanket out of the Smithsonian loan that was mentioned earlier. The Winneco Life of an Object is a second exhibition. It is 8,000 square feet. The other is 18,000 square feet. This is a Sac and Fox wearing blanket, and it's laid flat. It's not really how you would notice it, but what I wanted to draw your attention to is the design elements. And so one of the things that we did in having that respect was to respect the elements of design, not to try to alter them. I will say this was a little bit of a fuss with our exhibition designers who thought they could make it better. And I was like, I don't think this is better. But they were respectful of our work and took this design and translated it into the panel systems that we used within the exhibition, Winneco Life of an Object. And this is how that looks in the gallery. And so we created a space that provided respect to the objects. This is in the back section of the gallery, actually. It's just that it's so pretty to see those designs. But the background here is the colors of dusk. The background in the front section is the color of dawn, and these are moments of prayer. If you're in this gallery, the gallery casework actually forms an infinity symbol that represents the infinity of our cultures. And there is designs throughout that help us to draw that these things are related to the cosmos, our place in this contemporary 21st century world, even after relocation. Do not violate the fact that we were placed here by the Creator for a purpose, and we have a reason to be here, that we continue every generation to carry that purpose forward, to carry that knowledge forward. We also incorporated reciprocity into our work, working with the tribes. And so what you're seeing here is an example of the kinds of things that we have since opening, have been developing a searchable veterans database for our tribal members in Oklahoma. It is the most frustrating thing for some of our community members who are not from our Oklahoma tribes to not be able to be in that. But what you see, let me see if I can do that. This is a database, a searchable database in the gallery where we talk about veterans. And this is one of the images. We invite community members in 1 weekend a year. We open it up and people can come and have their portrait made. She showed up and she was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and she went in the bathroom and she came out. This is Sergeant Randy Sunray, and she wanted to be shown in her Kiowa high dress, but also with her sergeant's jacket. This is a way that we can honor those community members and let their families come in, and this has been an incredibly valuable contribution to our community. We also have a community gallery where we work. I call it a baby gallery because I've been curating so long. This is just about 1,000 square feet, and I can almost do it in my sleep. I don't mean that to be disrespectful, but it's not challenging. And what we've been able to do is cultivate relationships with 39 tribes. Only 13 of them have their own museums. Even the ones with their own museums are not necessarily located at the intersection of I-35 and I-40. We're currently operating at about 250,000 visitors a year. We expect in the next year to have that expand to 350,000 because on our site, a resort with an indoor outdoor water park opened last Friday. And so with their visitorship and estimating at maybe about 20%, we're going to increase by 100,000 visitors. And so that's an access point for many people to see works from communities that might otherwise not be accessible to them. And so this is Mended, the language of Miami, a ribbon work. And we worked with the tribal community to curate it, to develop the artwork, to develop the message. And we make sure that we hold together the framework and the budget and the schedule, but we work with the tribe to give them full authority over how they want to be represented and how they want to speak to the audiences. We also are on the tail end of a major research project that Elizabeth mentioned called Winneco Reunions. We have 135 objects on loan for the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian. These are items that are the core of the Winneco Life of an Object exhibition. During the early stages of development, Welena Quiton, who's the co-curator of the exhibition, noticed that there were family names on the archival notes. And she brought them to me and she just placed them on the desk and she said, just read these. And I was reading them and it's like, you're reading about Henry Red Eagle. And I'm like, well, there's Red Eagle Park in Osage County. Like, do you think that that's a relationship? And she's like, I don't know. And we agreed that the identification of the descendant families of these objects had merit. It was not something NMAI was super excited about. I think they didn't know what we were going to do. And they said, well, you can do that. But then once the objects are in the case, then we're going to be done with that research, right? And we're like, okay. But who would have known? You heard me say, we started working on this in the spring of 2018. By the time we got to the tribes with the packages of research and working through the details of giving them the authority over how they were going to be represented in both galleries, it was about the fall of 2019. We were 6 months into this research when this little global pandemic thing came across and sort of threw us a curveball. So we put a stop to it out of an abundance of care. Not a one of us wanted to take an elder's life and create a jeopardy that might cause somebody to lose an elder in their family just because we were curious. And so we stopped the work of it. Interestingly enough, my colleague, partner representing NMAI in that work was Cynthia Chavez Lamar, who shortly after we opened became director of NMAI. And about 6 months after we opened the museum, she and I were at a private event and she said, let's go back to it. And so it took me about a year to put the money together, and thankful to the Ford Foundation, the Henry Luce Foundation, the Terra Foundation for American Art, and the National Endowment for the Arts, we were able to, this past fall, reunite 76 of those items with their families. We hosted 354 community members in our museum to spend time with those objects, to pray with those objects, to sing for them. And we are currently producing a book, and there will be a film. So come down, because next June we're going to be releasing all of that. To build these relationships, I use the term kincentricity. If we think about the idea of how things, I have this strong affinity for science, and I find the idea of physics as a really good analogy. There's matter, but without physics, you don't understand those interactions, right? We can think of kincentricity as the human relationships that cause all the things that happen between our various communities, yours and mine, and here we are in this space in the same time. That's kincentricity that brought us together. And so thinking about that, and what you're looking at is our former director, James Pepper Henry, who was our founding director, and the French ambassador talking to us about possibly bringing home hides that had been gifted to the French nation by tribes that are now in Oklahoma, making a site visit to see if he can support that work. Unfortunately, we don't have a gallery, so if anybody has like $6 million, I have a really good purpose for it. You never know, right? You never know. I don't know who y'all are. I don't have $6 million, but if you do, let's talk. And, you know, working with those relationships, this is an example. These 4 men in the middle of COVID left their families for 6 months to build our galleries. They don't live in Oklahoma. They made the sacrifice. Many of them came in thinking they were just going to come in for like a 6-week stint. That was the original plan, for them to come in and kind of rotate through so that nobody was through. Once these men understood what we were doing and what it was going to mean for our families, they on their own, I didn't even know they had done this, made the decision and had let the leadership know that they wanted to stay to see it to the end. So how do we not honor those relationships? And while there are lots of bad things associated with blankets, including smallpox and other ways of stealing children into boarding schools, it remains a staunch moment within Native communities. To be gifted a blanket is to be gifted care and love and appreciation and an understanding that there is a relationship that will never be terminated between you. And this remains. I still text with these guys. We've been open for 3 years, and I'm still like, hey, did you watch that basketball game? You know, we stay in touch, and I'm so proud of them. And they ask how the museum is doing. And, you know, our relationships will continue as long as we feed them, as long as we foster that trust and foster that respect. It is part of FAM's responsibility not only to be telling these stories, but also to be fostering those relationships with the other citizens in the state. That includes, of course, the tribes. And one of the things that I love about this slide is that this is, if you've never seen Oklahoma on a map, this is Oklahoma. And it's got this panhandle area, but if you notice, this area is kind of grayed back, and that grayed back area comes down to here. But all of this other vibrant colored land, that is Indian land. That is sovereign Indian land. And when you are driving through Oklahoma on I-44, which you can see represented by that red line right there, you are driving through multiple tribal nations' boundaries. And these are things that we try to help people understand, that just coming to FAM, they have been on Indian land, just coming to see us, whether they understood it or not, whether they read the sign that says, welcome to Cheyenne and Arapaho Tribal Reservation. Whatever it is that you didn't see, you are on tribal land. We also have initiated, oh, I'm so sorry that that photo of the baby got slipped. I'm not sure. She's really cute. But we have initiated I'm sure it's my part. That's not a criticism. I don't know what I'm doing half the time. So we initiated a program based on relationships that we were fostering with the tribal communities as we were developing some of the objects that were selected for the exhibition, by asking tribes, help us to see what you want to be represented by. And there were a few items that, like one, for instance, wearing blanket that honors the first chapter of the American Indian, or the American War Mothers in the Oto Missouri tribe, which is the first tribal chapter ever established. And these women during World War II joined the American War Mothers so that they could help be part of a larger movement. The American War Mothers has basically retired itself. They're no longer active, but our tribal chapters remain critical. And so we had a blanket made to honor those women. And the tribal chairman said, we're going to have to bring that back to dance it, don't you? And I was like, yeah, I do see that. And he said, okay, just as long as we're in agreement about it. And it was a matter of us getting open, and then Hallie Winter, who was our founding collections manager, going, you do remember you promised him we were going to be able to allow that to come back, but that's not in our policies. So we took the next year to figure out how to be doing what we committed ourselves to do. And we now have a policy formalized that is shared stewardship, where when we take items in, we have a deed of gift that is specific to this policy that allows us to be able to document the relationship we are fostering with whoever that donor is, to honor their wishes with it. This was the first item taken in. I love all that music. I feel like it's a cue. Heather, you're running out of time. So this cradle board belongs to FAM. We have taken it into our permanent collection, but we have a legal obligation in relationship with the donors that every time their family has a new infant born, they are welcome to come and take that cradle board and get that portrait. And I just want to ask you, isn't that so obvious? Isn't that just so obvious what a museum should be doing? But this is a very new thing. I researched for a year and a half who had a policy set to help us to have some sort of template. I wrote that. And I have no idea what I'm doing. Nobody should ask me to write policy, but there we are. We also worked with responsibility, and that is to being responsible to the tribal knowledge, the stories that are told. We have a video that plays of Dr. Henrietta Mann speaking of her great-grandmother, who was a survivor of the Washita Massacre, the Sand Creek Massacre. She survived both of those massacres to be able to raise her great-granddaughter. So Henrietta Mann is speaking, and you can see her to the right, but that's also her in that cradle board. And we have a way that we can use the space of a museum to speak to the truth of our stories, to bring our Indigenous voices to the fore, and to create a place for healing. All of that work can't be done without the responsibility back to our leadership, and we get so much support. This is our board of directors, and you can see that Dr. Mann was formerly on our board of directors. That's how we got to learn about her story. And their commitment to making sure that we have the financial resources is part of that reciprocity, even from the leadership of the institution back to the curatorial team. This is the kind of work of bringing our Indigenous philosophies into a museum space, thinking how can we show and mean and do and help build a better place for all of us. As we diversify our understanding of our world, we are each contributing to a conversation as a visitor, as a guest, as a curator, as a guest services. The director just got up and she's like, what the hell? And, it is just a sign. I'm done. I appreciate your patience. I haven't done too bad on time, and I can't remember. I think it's Dakota that's the next one. So I'm gonna, oh, Meranda, yes. Thank you all.
Okay, well, I'm going to do my best to do this. First, I want to thank you all for being here tonight, and I also just want to preface this with saying that working at the Field Museum of Natural History for 4 years on this project, 4 to 5 years, was the most unique and challenging experience that I've ever had, and I think the emotions of it all sit at the top of my chest a lot, and it's the first time I'm talking about it in a way that I am not kind of still reeling from the emotional abuse that I suffered there. But I am starting on the process of thinking about how this information is good for students. And one thing why I want to tell students and that I teach my students is I bring my full self to anything that I do. So sometimes I cry, sometimes I'm upset. but it's all in relationship to the prayers that have been bestowed on me by my family, and the responsibilities that they have put on me, whether or not I have asked for them, but they're here and I honor them. So I will get started. I am a citizen of the Arrington Paiute tribe and Chicana. I come from a ghost dance religion. I was going to talk a little bit about land acknowledgements, but I can always provide this with later. I don't have to use this to educate you. This talk will not focus on the Field Museum experience specifically. I did a podcast with a friend of mine named Felicia Garcia, who is Chumash, and I go into great detail about what it was like working at the Field Museum from this perspective on that podcast, should you want to know more. And this was a team effort. Everything that I'm saying was done in relationship with a team and a Native Advisory Committee. I am only one person a part of this project, and I want to make sure that I honor the time and effort that was put forth by everybody. But of course, I don't have the time for that. But just so you know, I'm not alone in this. And before I always start any of my presentation, I think it's important for you all to know who I am. I come from a long line of people who unfortunately have a lot of trauma and that they had to work throughout their lives that trickled down to the point where I had to become responsible in different ways at a young age. And I've had to become familiar with death in many different ways. My father, my uncle, and my grandfather all work at a cemetery in Altadena, California. My family's from Altadena. We're fine. Our family home is fine, but it has shaped the way that I think about the world and influences my curatorial approach a lot, in the sense that death is not, for me, something that we should be afraid to talk about or be fearful of. It's a celebration of different things. Of course, there's a time for mourning. But for me, I've been taught that if I'm going to meet my ancestors at some point, which I will, then I have to be held accountable to them, and I have to be able to tell them what I did in this world. And these are my ancestors who have all gone on, but who I carry in my heart and who maintain the practices that I have today, including some of our tribal land or our land in Yerington. All of these, and some of my community members in Southern California, where I currently live and teach at the Pomona colleges. These are all the lessons that sustain me and the people who I carry close to my heart. And why I'm so passionate about intergenerational justice on terms of Native American people and Mexican American people, because I am very honest. I believe that it is our responsibility to talk about the founding of this country in very serious and respectful ways, while also being okay with celebrating who Native people are. But I think that that historical background needs to be at the forefront of a lot of what we do, especially in museums. I'll get into that soon. And I also wanted to provide you with a quote that I just shared with my class the other day. I teach a class about Native American women. And I've been very fortunate to be able to expand my worldview into many different ways. And one thing that I always do is look for Indigenous research or Indigenous things that exist already in text that describe how people view the items that are in a collection. So for example, this is a cradle board that is made from an Anishinaabe family, but I really wanted this to kind of be the preface for you all to say that even though I am in art history, my degree is in history, my MA is in public history, and I don't believe that our work has to be, or Native American art needs to be dissected through one discipline. I think that through Indigenous methodologies can be applied to any discipline within any Western framework, and that we have been forced in many ways to have to define our cultural items through the lens of these Western disciplines, but that doesn't mean that that's where it ends. You can find our people, our community speaking about such pieces in many different ways and places, and it's our responsibility to make sure that those voices are heard in different ways. And especially when it comes to cultural items like this that are more than just a beautiful piece of art. I think that, yes, it's true. It is beautiful and deserves to be seen that way. However, for me, even though I'm not a mom, I respect and love children, and I recognize that this is a bringer of a new child's life that is being protected with these different symbols and these different characteristics. And I think that we have to give more attention to Native women, and especially Native women artists, about how they want their art to be seen and remembered within colonial institutions. So I hope that you can read this and take it and use it in your classes as well. It's a beautiful article through and through. Okay, so I will get into the nitty gritty. my arch nemesis, I'm just kidding. I worked at the Field Museum of Natural History. I started in 2018. I left before the new hall opened in 2021. So we curated a majority of the exhibition throughout the pandemic, which was extremely hard because at the Field Museum the collection is representative of almost every nation within this continent, Indigenous nations, all 500 and plus. And also, I will say that it's important to keep in mind that this collection specifically was assembled during the 1893's World Fair, a majority of it, I should say. So it wasn't just that it was brought here to Chicago to be nice, it was actually to help celebrate the 400 years that Columbus discovered America for a very specific purpose, as was this creation of this museum was to honor that longevity of Columbus discovering America and to show the progress that America had made since it discovered us. And so everything about this building is, to me, in my opinion, especially when I worked there, very daunting and very challenging because, as you know, the Art Greco building itself is signifying one particular way of thinking, that this is a high elitist place, that, you know, certain people are welcome while others aren't. Then you have this idea that is formed by natural history. So it's not just anthropology that is there. It is also, there's dinosaur bones there that you have to talk about and relate to. And then there's a lot of different things that you wouldn't expect to have to deal with in that sense. Taxidermy is a huge thing in natural history museums, which is confusing. But I remember when I was working here, the thing that always really haunted me was the statue of this woman who sits at the corner and one of the backhand corner right there. And that's the representative of anthropology as being one of the cornerstones of this museum. And I always would ask visitors, well, what kind of skull do you think she's holding? Or whose skull do you think she's holding? Right? And how daunting it is to not only have to see that as a signifier of how people once viewed our cultures as a vanishing race who would not survive past a certain point, but then also on top of that, underneath these layers are actual human remains that are still waiting to be taken back home. So there's different levels of things that are being re-ingrained in your head as you're working there that are being taught to you, and also different traumas. There's reminders, right, that you're not supposed, well, and from my perspective, that I'm not supposed to be here. It's a miracle that I am. But all of those reminders are things that you have to contend with in this space like this. And again, it's a natural history museum, so it's not specifically an art museum. However, again, like I said, the disciplines in my frame of mind have to break down to the point where it doesn't matter what the discipline is, the Native communities, people, artists need to be the ones speaking on behalf of these cultural items or with them. And that looks different in every setting, but the collaboration and the community building and the relationships are all the same. And of course, it varies by institution, but it still remains at the corner. I believe a lot of what Heather said as those cornerstones within that museum, the first Americans, are what really should be carrying a lot of these other institutions as well. So this is a very pixelated picture, but this was what the hall looked like in 1950 when it first opened and what it looked like for the next 70 years. Yes, 70 years. It was called, I think it's something about Columbus, of course, and the anthropologists at the time. So I can't get into all of these things that happened at this museum, but there were items that were stolen, were grave robbed, that were, even when something was paid for, I often even say, but it was under duress a lot of times. A lot of our communities are suffering in the 1890s through different means. And a lot of times our families had to sell things to make a living and to get, just to get through the next day. And that's what ended up in a lot of the Field Museum collection, a lot of sacred material that should never have been collected or taken, and a lot of specific like dress material. Now, I can't tell you for sure what parts were true, but some of these clothing items are actually, so they put them on mannequins, which are still kind of freaky to me. And the shirt might come from one nation, but the leggings came from a different nation, and that was because the anthropologists thought they looked better. So right away, as soon as this exhibition opened, you're already getting a very filtered viewpoint of what anthropologists wanted you to walk away with. And again, this exhibition was meant to be kind of like an in memory of the groups of people who were once here but no longer here, very much a vanishing race narrative at a time where we were still working and getting our civil. Well, I know, like I would say, actually, I don't want to say that. My history is getting a little messed in my head. Anyway, but basically, this is what the exhibition looked like throughout that whole time. I'll go on to other spaces. Very, very, it reminded me a lot of what we went through today at SLAM, in the sense that these are very devoid of human agency. It's very devoid of life in many ways. I mean, these items too, again, remember, have been on display, at least at this point, for 70 years. They hadn't taken a break. A lot of them were light damaged as a result of these practices. And also, little known fact, those, you had to enter through the sides of these particular cases. You couldn't take down the glass on the front end of them because they're load bearing. I don't know why. So our conservation team would have to go in one at a time in full hazmat suits, because a lot of items in the Field Museum collection are also poisonous with pesticides, because again, our anthropologist at the time thought that that was going to be the best way to preserve these items for generations. But in that sense, they poisoned them, right? And now we can't interact with them in the same ways that they should be interacted with. It does create different complexities when it comes to NAGPRA and repatriation, but that doesn't mean it can't happen. And it was very much like, here's women's clothing, here's men's clothing, very much just making us very in one, or this is what we all look like, and not giving any context. Here's some more. Not giving any context. This is a picture of when the hall started to become renovated towards 2018, 2019, with Deborah Papan and her husband Chris Papan, who live in Chicago, who are natives, and who started to work in the hall and try to like put in some sort of intervention to get people to understand that Native people are here, specifically in Chicago, because I think a lot of people forget that Chicago is Native land, and I'll get into that. I have a whole thing about Chicago, but that's later. And I think that for them, it was mostly about like putting more things into context, giving people more understanding that these people, that these ancestors who we come from are still here with us, that we're still thinking about them, that we're still creating from them as well, and that we should have access to them and they should be respected better. Again, it was a transactional, it took a while, so it was like very staged until we finally ended up clearing out the whole hall. But we had several, Rhonda Holy Bear also had a small exhibition in the front space. I never want to see another bison again, because this thing had been collected at the World's Fair. And one thing, I won't go too far into this, but I had the hardest time trying to convince docents to not become attached, to stop being attached to this piece, because for the past like 40 years, they had been working on their education plan, and a lot of it revolved around this bison. And it was their educational plan was very also problematic, really making, all Native people use bison, and it was a whole thing. But they became so attached to this that when I told them I'm moving it, it caused a few meetings. Don't move my bike. And again, it's just like this attachment to these things that, even though they are important to us, but this isn't how, we don't have bison where I'm from, but from what I've been taught is not how we would honor a bison for in any way, shape, or form. And so to me, it made sense to just move it to another space. Then you have also a lot of sacred materials that were out on display for a very, very long time, which is why Chris, who is a ledger artist, put up different of his pieces to cover them, to finally give them some break before they came down. But those are the pieces that people mostly wanted to come see. So when I talk about this exhibition, we have to remember that 70 years, generations of people are coming through this museum, learning about Native history in this way, in a very particular way. And they're waiting. Oh my gosh, I'm done. But basically, let me just go forward a little bit. I can provide you my slides as well, because I don't want to take up too much more time, so don't worry about that. But finally, after a lot of trouble and a lot of headache, we opened Native Truths, Our Voices, Our Stories. And it really does center some key Native truths that lay out throughout the whole exhibition. And in the core, throughout the middle, are different stories that get rotated out throughout time or during time. And in the center, Chicago is the center of that whole exhibition. So a Native story that is always from Chicago gets told. We incorporated different things from the collection as well as new contemporary art. We made sure that some of the collection was told about in different ways. I'll just go speed through this. I worked with Frank Wom, who's a Lakota hip hop artist, reuniting him with some of the collection materials that are music that he used then to create an album, or as inspiration to create an album. From his time, this was a piece that was acquired. I'm going to go through that. I don't have to show you that. And basically what I have, I'll end here because I can go on and on about this. It's that the responsibility of museums, whether they're natural history or art that hold our collections, have a responsibility to engage with us in meaningful ways. They include educating the public about the harmful practices, and they're not solely artistic objects, but carry knowledge, wisdom, and histories that often don't conform to wisdom or Western ways of understanding them. And all of this work that I did at a natural history museum helped me create continuity, Cahuilla basket weavers and their legacies, where I was able to reconnect a lot of these baskets with their Cahuilla basket weaving women and their grandmothers. And display them without vitrines. And so I was also able to work with the museum on developing different ways Cahuilla people could come into the museum at certain times to be with their relatives, and then the public was open at different times. And I was able to gain all of this knowledge by just having a real hard time, but a real good time at the Field Museum. So thank you.
Hamtakyapi. Chante washte na be chiuzapi. Dakota makiapie. Lakota wiya himacha. Ga wazi ahaha elomawapi. Hello, my relatives. I shake all of your hands with a good heart. My name is Dakota. I'm a Lakota woman, and I'm enrolled in the Pine Ridge Reservation. Okay, so first of all, I want to thank the organizing folks for inviting me to come. And I want to pay respects to my two co-presenters tonight, because I feel like we have a lot in common. We're coming from three very different types of museums. So I'm coming from the Denver Art Museum. As Elizabeth said, I'm in transition right now, but we always looked at Native art as art, and Heather, you're getting a perspective of a real community effort, and then you're getting a perspective from a natural history museum. So you're really kind of getting a kind of a well-rounded look at how different museums are approaching the discussion and display around Native art. So today I'm going to talk to you about the Denver Art Museum in 2025 is celebrating that they have been collecting Indigenous art of North America for 100 years. And so I was charged with throwing that exhibition, and I did that along with my two collaborators and partners in crime, which was Danielle Stevens. And so she is in charge, is in our learning and engagement department. And Jenny Trujillo was at the time our curatorial assistant, and right now she's working as a fellow in our department. So as I said, the Denver Art Museum was collecting Native artwork for 100 years, and so we wanted to take a moment to celebrate that, but that's a weird thing to celebrate, right? Because it's like very important for a Western institution, it's a touch point, but it's not very important to Native people because we've been here forever. So how do you kind of bridge that gap? And so what we decided to do was to enlist 7 advisors to kind of help us understand, like, what's the way that we could use this moment to create an exhibition that would be meaningful for our local and regional communities. And so in order to do that, so something about the Denver Art Museum is we have an Indigenous Advisory Council, and we meet with them quarterly. And of course, everybody on the council wanted to be in charge or like work on this exhibition. But we also are just like always kind of trying to learn about how can we expose people to the museum? How can we get them invested in what we're doing? And so we took half of our council, and then we brought in 3 other community members so we could get some fresh voices, and they could also get to know us. So the exhibition planning was it just took a year, and as Heather and Miranda can probably attest to, that's a very short time in museum world to throw an exhibition. But we did pull it off. It opened December 22nd of 2024. But we had a first kickoff meeting in which we met with the 7 advisors, and we presented them with some ideas that we thought, and we didn't ever think that they were going to take those, but we always kind of, I feel personally it's better to have something to react to than to ask a group to come up with something completely new. So that's why we decided to go that route. And it was really fun to see them pick and choose and kind of see what bubbled up to the top during those discussions. The next time I came with 500 little sheets of paper that they could sort like cards about things that really appealed to them or didn't appeal to them. And I was really surprised, you know, things that are known at the museum as like our most stellar pieces. They were like, whoop, whatever, but this tells a great story. You know, so it's really, this is the beauty of working collaboratively, right? Not only do you see your own blind spots or where you might be hyper focused, but also you just get these fresh ideas. I should interject here that Heather and I first met because I supported an exhibition called Hearts of Our People, which was a collaborative effort. And that was my first curatorial experience, and I found I loved this idea of collaboration. And then I kind of love that I have this synergy with Miranda, who's also focused on Native women. And so just another reason we're connected. In the third meeting, we got to go to collections, and this is kind of one thing. I don't know how all museums are, but the Denver Art Museum is really open, and I think a large part of my work was to make that museum feel and be more open for Native community. I think most Native people, one, they don't really see themselves in a museum. Kind of first, to Miranda's point, because of these colonial structures that they have to enter, you know, they have to enter through the gates of a painful history just to go into the space. We don't really have that at the dam, which I was glad for. But also, you know, the people don't realize that you can just request to go into the exhibitions. It's just like, you know, call me 2 weeks later, we can set up this appointment. We've got all your stuff laid out. People didn't realize that. So we did a lot of work with like school groups and kind of breaking down those barriers. But for a lot of people, like it was really fun for them to go into collections because it's not something they really realized they had access to. And then our fourth meeting, so these were monthly meetings, and in our fourth meeting, we showed them the fly-through. So it was really quick work. We had kind of a preliminary layout, and we worked really collaboratively with these 7 folks. And the theme that they really wanted to talk about after seeing the objects and going through these processes was the way art has sustained us over time. And so that's the theme that bubbled up. And then, you know, through the selection of their objects, we came up with 3 themes: beauty, connections, and spirituality. And because I worked on Hearts of Our People, and because I've seen a lot of shows that say relationships, you know, and so I was talking to the 7 advisors. I'm like, a lot of shows have used this term of relationships. And one of the advisors said, you know, I don't want to be a copycat. But one of the advisors said, you know, it's a Native-based exhibition. If it wasn't themed around relationships, it wouldn't truly be Native. And so I was like, okay, here we go. So just a little detail about the exhibition. It's not chronological, and it's not limited to those 100 years. Really what it was about was telling these stories, and that fit under these subcategories. Okay, so first of all, like talking about being sustained by beauty. Signifying our indigeneity is a large part of our artwork, and we do that through our clothing and our adornment. I think all 3 of our speakers had on our awesome earrings tonight. So it had a large fashion component in this section, but it also talked about the ways that as our life ways were undermined, that we took and kind of retooled the practices that we already had in place so that we could appeal to new markets that, you know, before we would have used those for our own cultural edification, but now we were kind of retooling that to make money to support our families. So this is kind of what it looks like. This is the beauty section, and I'll show you a few slides of this. But on the left, we've got some earrings for the gods from Eric Paul Riege. And in that small case against that green wall, we have other items of turquoise and stuff. So throughout the exhibition, we're really combining the historic with the contemporary, because we always want to be talking about, how we're still here. And I want to show our own native canons and the way that our artistic through lines have carried through the generations. This is another angle. Has anybody been to the Denver Art Museum? So when you come right off the elevator, there's where Mud Woman is. She greets you. And so this beauty section happens like in that very first section of the museum. This is our area on fashion and adornment. And so here you can see very clearly how we had the contemporary with the historic, and actually through every, kind of decade, we had something represented. And here, let's see. And you'll see these kind of like really large labels as we're going through the exhibition. We have, besides the 7 advisors, we have a program at our museum called Our Voices, where we always kind of try to give the opportunity for community members to talk about the artwork in relationship to themselves or their communities, or in whatever way they want to talk about it. We also, one of the things I always try to do in my practice is combine a lot of different communities together, because I don't think people realize there's 500 and I think it's 574 federally recognized tribes. And so I really want to show people like how vast our communities are, how many different protocols we have, and how many different lifeways and ways of signifying that we had. So people just don't say, "Are you Indian?" Like no, I'm Lakota, and Miranda's Paiute, and Heather, what are you again? How many names can we have for this lady? This section is the one that's where we're talking about things that were made for the market. And here you see like the adornment that was related to the gardens, the earrings for the gods. This is a Diani Whitehawk piece combined with a historic outfit. And in that piece, she talks about a lot of different things, but she made this to the scale. And here's a better slide where you can see how many like singular marks she was making. And she did that to pay homage to her ancestors. There's many things embedded for her in this piece, but one of the things was like how much dedication and thought and time went into creating a fully quilled outfit like the one shown next to her. Close-up of some of those items shown, juxtapose the earrings for the gods, something for the market, a cribbage set made out of a walrus tusk, so beautiful. Sustained by the connections, that's actually our largest section. I see that I'm running out of time, but I will say we wanted to focus on not only our ancestors, our relatives, but the reasons we gather, home and family. And we also wanted to explore like our deep ecological knowledge that allows Indigenous people to explore, to create unique works of art based on the region. So here we kind of have an ancestor from the future from Virgil Ortiz, and then we have Warrior Woman by Rhonda Holybear. So really talking about like the strength of our women in our communities and the ancestors we know now and in the future. So just kind of solidifying, like our continuation. This is the little case on the right. It's got different things related to food, to talk about our food sovereignty. We've got Stephen Yazzi's painting of his grandfather, who is Dene and a code talker. We've got an homage to the Horse Nation, but also we've got this this handmade breastplate by a Lakota gentleman from our community. And it was all of those gun shell casings he saved when he was hunting for his family and created a breastplate But he said, I got too old. I can't. It weighs like 30 pounds. So he's like, do you want it? I was like, yes. But just again, talking about food sovereignty. Home and family. We have this super cool video that Jeffrey Gibson made really early in his career, but it shows like elders from the community in our collection and then young people too that were kind of reacting to the items. And here we've got one of these Our Voices labels, and this person was talking about how meaningful it was when when the elders were walking through the collection. She's like, I knew they were leaving us and that I better step up. It's just a real beautiful testament. This is looking back. The 3 items on the wall are talking about our specialized ecological knowledge. And then they really wanted a game section. That's another thing. Like, I wouldn't have thought to put that in there, but that was really important to our advisors. And so I had this piece that I had bought from Tom Jones, and this woman is holding the stick for double ball over her shoulder. And we hadn't shown that yet, so it really got to be the star of the exhibition. And then we had these game pieces. And then finally, spirituality. It had a focus on children. First of all, for Lakota people, we call our children wakaheza, so like the sacred beings. They're fresh from the Creator, so they still possess a lot of wisdom. There's other cultures that have similar kind of feelings for their children. The Dene, for instance, through a ceremony at the child's first smile or laugh, so just showing how precious our children are to us. But also, this was like an area where we were really talking about those people who preserved stories for into the future. This is like looking back. We've got like an Oscar Howe piece. And then we've got a Dick West piece, that are showing kind of different aspects of the lives of their cultures. Here's the Sacred Children section. Again, combining the historic with the contemporary. This piece is really near and dear to my heart. This was made by Terry Greaves. So she hand dyed all of the substrates and then beaded on top of them. I don't know where she's at right now, but at the time she made this, this was the largest work she had ever made to date. It measures 6 feet by 8 feet. And it's telling the story, like the kind of the creation story of the Kiowa, but it has a lot of signifiers in there, like Spider Woman, the ants. Her sister kind of came in. Whoops. And right down here, she hand cast like 100 little ants for Terry that were sewn in. So there's just a lot to learn about that piece. You can see it online if you want more information. And these were also by Terry. They were in our Sacred Children section, so some Converse. So again, combining the historic with the contemporary. And this is our dance and ceremony. And this piece is on loan from one of the members on our advisory council because her grandfather, John M. Hula, who you kind of caught a glimpse of when I was showing you the video, this was one of the hand drums he used for ceremony, and he was so important to the Denver Art Museum. And then again, just talking about kind of funny things like Norval Morrisseau did consider himself to be a shaman. These drums by Jeffrey Gibson, just a really contemporary take on the hand drum that we're seeing across. And a Pueblo dance by Fritz Scholder. And of course, our future stories or our contemporary stories, the Harry Fonseca. Okay, so the goals and considerations of this exhibition were to celebrate Native people and their contributions to the museum. I mean, I think that the Denver Art Museum understands how integral Native art is to their reputation and to their standing as an institution within the wider world. We always, again, wanted to combine the historical and contemporary, and we wanted to continue to present works from multiple communities to show the great diversity of our nations and tribal communities. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Please join me in thanking all three of our speakers. Thank you for your generosity, for your wisdom, and for your calls to action and calls for accountability. Thank you. We have a little bit of time for questions from the audience, and I'll invite you to turn your mic on. Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Brian. And I will walk around with the mic so that we can hear the questions. I open it up to you all. That's true. You may also ask each other questions. I do. Galen, are you related to John Gritz at all? All right. So he is also an important participant at the Denver Art Museum. And you didn't get to see the slides, but we have a picture of him as part of the exhibition.
I emailed him today.
Okay.
We're cousins.
Tell him Dakota was talking, because I missed their lunch. I was supposed to go to lunch with him and Paige.
Oh, wow.
And I was so busy packing, I forgot all about it.
Why do I have to be the bearer of the bad news? No, actually, he sent me a postcard of the Mud Woman, and it hangs in my office right where I sit on my computer. I see her all the time. So that's very cool. I will tell him that you're sorry.
Hello, thank you all. This is a question that I think is mainly for Heather, but I think all of you could probably speak on it, which is, I think, when you've talked about sort of incorporating and embedding these native philosophies into your museum practices, it comes across as very unified. And I wonder if in your various practices, if you come across points of tension between perhaps various groups of people who don't always see eye to eye on the same, and how you go about navigating that and, honoring those.
Do you remember that I said there were 11 members of our curatorial team? We all came from different tribes. One of the things that has been remarked to me is how unifying the gallery is of bringing these diverse stories together and telling our collective history. We often use the metaphor of a braid of sweetgrass, that we can't all be at the top, but we're all still part of the core strength of the work. I love every one of those members of the team. There are 3 that won't work with me anymore. And that isn't a matter of, I don't know, I can't speak for them. But what I do know is that it's very complex work. And if we are bringing our Indigenous philosophies to bear, if you put somebody who, like myself, I'm Chickasaw and Choctaw, by the way. I was like, hey, in the room with a Comanche man, right? And my tribe is very matriarchal. And we had several tribes that are patriarchal. And in the beginning, there would be these moments where people that worked for me would be like, well, why don't you go ask Jim, our director? Because he was a man. And because in their cultures, a woman couldn't make those decisions. And so we several times had to have JPH come to our team meetings to say, Heather is in charge here, and you're going to have to work with her, even if it's uncomfortable. And so does that mean that they were wrong? That they were working out of their cultural philosophies? I really don't believe that. What I do know is that it calls on all of us to adapt in some way. And we used a process of consensus to make the decisions in the gallery. 1,000 decisions are in that gallery. There's over 600 images. There are 700 pages in the script where we work through the labels. Every one of those labels was a decision, because there were probably, for each place, for instance, where we spoke about removal, we had more than 39 stories to tell because there were 67 tribes removed. And even on those stories, Each tribe had multiple kinds of stories that could be told. And each of us carried the responsibility to represent 3 or 4 tribes within those conversations. One that was our own, but 2 that were not. And it called upon us to bring our very best self to that. All those decisions got made by consensus except for 3. I know exactly which 3 it was. And that wasn't a failure. It was just a matter, in some ways, of just exhaustion. We just didn't have the energy to sit through it. And I would say, I'm going to pull this from the table. And you understand that means I'm going to make the decision. And there was a consensus that they were not going to be able to come to a point, and they were letting me pull that. But everything else, they participated in that process. There's no way to put human beings in a room and expect them to agree. We are all a part of this humanity, and we come with these perspectives that require of us to listen and to be thoughtful and to come with an open heart to try to do the best. But that doesn't mean that just because I see things that is best this way and someone else sees it differently as a different way that's best, it doesn't make me right just because I'm the supervisor. It means that we have to think about how to come together to a point where we can all find some value to that. So it was incredibly contentious. It was exhausting. It was very difficult to be fighting about stories because sometimes we knew these were hard stories to find, and it was very likely history is not everything that happened. History is only the stories that we continue to tell. And if that is a fact, that in museums we are editing the stories that will be carried forward, we are very conscious of that fact in our work. So it was very difficult. And you can't even put how many of us at NASA, Native American Art Studies Association, in a room together. We don't all agree, but we have a shared commitment as Indigenous scholars, as Indigenous curators, as thinkers, and as humans to try to do something good, because we know that 100 years ago we weren't expected to be here. And what we have an absolute responsibility is to be building a path for the forward so that we are not just here in 100 years, but we are thriving in 100 years. And that's a huge responsibility. And it means that we sometimes have to put our egos away so that we can find that best path.
I would just really liked what Heather was saying about consensus. So that's a very important Lakota tenet. And it's always encouraged, like, I understand the like why democracy is a good thing. And, you know, if you get 51 votes, let's say you have 100 community members, you get 51 votes, but 49 people are still upset, and that causes harm to the community, right? And so this idea of consensus, and what I think it was so beautiful about the process that Heather undertook, is that you never know where that grain of wisdom is going to come from. And so in the consensus process, you're taught to kind of listen to everybody, because that next great idea could be from somebody that's completely outvoted. So I kind of love this idea of consensus and try to work in that good way too.
Good question. I just want to say thank you for your presentations, and building on something I heard you saying now, and I really appreciated from each of your presentations, was thinking about the action and the state of a verb that I don't think I'll be able to say exactly as well as Galen did in his blessing about thinking of what we do as a verb and life as a verb. And so often museums are framed only as nouns, as a place, or as something that is like a static state. And so thank you for reminding us that they're also living places. And I'm wondering if you have any other thoughts about museums as verbs and the work that you do, helping us reframe the verb nature of museum spaces or potential of museum spaces.
Thank you. So I think over the past few years, or maybe the past decade, have been talking about this idea of decolonizing the museum, or decolonizing the academy in different ways. And I am affirmed, this is my opinion, after what I've seen at the field, as you can't really decolonize a colonial place like that. I mean, it's the foundation of the museum at the Field Museum itself is inherently colonial, was built that way for a reason. And I think you can, for me, I think that museums, if they're going to be in the future, I think, and survive, I think they need to be more spaces of dialogue, but provide more spaces where we can have discussions like this repeatedly instead of just like one-off sessions, because the public is very, from what I've observed, very curious about what goes on in a museum, and they want to know some of the things that actually get decided on from a curatorial point of view. And they also have questions about a lot of the pieces or how things were assembled. And I think that we owe it to them in that kind of way because they don't know. I don't think it's a mystery. And I will say, though, that museums themselves, though, have they're just institutions, and a lot of times they're a business, right? And they have their own bottom line that they have to fulfill at the same time. But that shouldn't be at the expense of the people who work in them, and it shouldn't be at the expense of the Native people who are being asked to collaborate on there. When I talk about museums itself, is like, how are the museums going to collaborate with the Native communities, or how are they going to give back to them, not the other way around? Because we are being asked to come into this space to lend our knowledge, but what are we getting in return, so to speak? And so I want to make sure that it's a space where dialogue and these hard questions that we're facing in this country today can actually happen, instead of being afraid that they just don't happen. I think we could do that.
I'm just going to add that I do think that part of it is the conception of what the museum is. The practice of museums comes out of the European expansion across the globe, and as colonizers were going out into every continent and dominating people, they would bring back war trophies, right, to these European nations. And so the birth of this idea of a museum comes out of being able to display war trophies that represented dominance. That certainly we're not necessarily at that same place anymore, but we're also not necessarily so far from that, right? But I think rather than thinking of museums and you know, this idea of like verb-based, like most languages in the world globally are verb-based. English is one of the few that is actually noun-based. And so it is this European perspective of thinking that the noun or the person is the most important thing that is the weakness. If we think of the museums not simply as places, but as cultural institutions, culture is a dynamic, ever-evolving space. I, as a Choctaw woman, I don't practice Choctaw culture in the same way that my grandmother did. But I am very honored that I dance in the same place where she danced, and that I took my daughter there. And very likely this summer we'll take my granddaughter. When we think about that and the act of creating culture, and this is a different lecture that I give, and I'm not going to give you that lecture right now, but as curators, we are creating new ways of understanding the world. We are fabricating a story that we are hoping you want to engage with. I think they do an awfully good job here, and I just want to thank you again for all the wealth and care that everybody has provided to us here. We have to imagine that we have a role, both as a guest and both as a curator, both as a student and also as somebody who's a teacher. You are creating culture. You are participating in culture. And it is through that process of exchange that we are creating our future. This idea, I really loved your example of the 49 and the 51, because I'm thinking about a little place a little bit farther East Coast where there is this very minute divide that is setting a path for us. And I see, you're going to just have to forgive me. I cannot think about the removal of our Indian people 200 years ago and not think about the idea that somebody imagines that the Gaza Strip should be a fucking resort. We cannot imagine that no matter where you sit on the political divide, I don't have an opinion about Trump. I don't have an opinion about Republicans, because what I do believe is that they want the best for their families, that they want the best that they can do for themselves. But we are all, as citizens of this nation, held responsible for the choices that we are making. We are all held in an accountability for that, because we are all contributing to what that will be in 100 years from now. So I'm not asking you to make a decision a certain way. I am not asking you to vote a certain way. But I will tell you, we are all part of that culture. We are all part of this shared culture. And while you may not dance where I take my granddaughter to dance this summer, there is some place that's important to you. There is some place that you hold sacred for your family. And whether that's your dining table or, where your grandparents are buried, hold yourself accountable to thinking of that as an ongoing product of our participation within culture. And we can make a better society together. And we can find a way to bridge these divides that have been part of the nation's history since its founding.
I appreciate the words that my colleague said so much. I'm going to take just a slightly different tack. What? Nuh-uh. Nuh-uh. I just have also one other thing I want to say about museum spaces, and I think one of the greatest injustices museum spaces did, and I don't really know how this happened, but they took the art away from us in some ways, right? They made it for a select few, and then many of us can't see ourselves there, but all of us are related to art. We're all picking our favorite colors. We're all painting our homes. We're all choosing, the clothing that we wear, the color of car that we wear, and somehow the act of art and what it really means to the human experience got isolated into these fortresses. That doesn't bother me because I love art. I'll go in there every day, all day, every day. I can't imagine anybody wants to do anything else. But there's a lot of people who don't see themselves there or don't think art pertains to them, or so somehow we kind of lost the commonality of art and how it ties us together and how it elevates us and all the different uses that we have for art from a day-to-day life. So that's one thing I would like to see kind of be brought. And I think I'm thinking about that from a Native perspective, because when I was in Minneapolis, and I was like, because I can't imagine why you don't want to be in an art museum every day. That's a true story. I love to be in an art museum, but my Native peeps, I'm like, why don't you guys come? And they're like, we don't have a culture of standing around looking at stuff, And so somehow the art got transformed into this thing we could no longer relate to. And I would like to kind of see that come back.
You've made us think so much about museums as active and creative spaces, spaces where things happen and where things are made. And I just want to thank you all for what you have made and what you have brought to us here in St. Louis. And thank you all for being here tonight. And we will look forward to when we meet again. Thank you.